How has the role of the cartographer evolved in modern day world with satellite imagery and all? And is draftsmanship still a requirement for cartographers, or have modern developments rendered it unnecessary?
Those are both great questions. And so let me start with the second one first, because it's really easy. Draftsmanship is basically gone. I would say by the end of the 90s, essentially by the year 2000, pretty much every cartographic outfit I know abandoned any, hard copy form, unless they needed it for a specific purpose. But for the most part, the actual production of cartography shifted onto computers, and we use what we call geographic information systems. So a GIS is essentially a spatial database, and what it does is it organizes data in layers, and it helps us as cartographers and as geographers to understand the spatial phenomenon out there in the world. And so, for example, in the database, you can have a layer of boundaries. So like all the international boundaries or state boundaries, that's one layer. Another layer could be population data for where people are actually, where they exist. You could have elevation data, so the topographic data, so you know where all the hills and valleys and rivers and all that. Hydrographic data for rivers and lakes. And so then when we're making a map, basically we pick and choose what layers we want to show. And a lot of times that's based on the specific purpose of the map. And there's generally two types of maps that have existed in modern times. Usually it's either a general purpose map, which is kind of like what you would see on Google Maps or Bing Maps or Apple Maps, which is where you kind of have a mix of stuff that's useful to you. So you see roads, you see the names of the roads, the names of features like parks, towns, fast food, gas stations, all that kind of stuff. So it's meant to kind of give you a general orientation of like, here's where you are, and here's the stuff around you that you might find important. But then a lot of maps that we are much more familiar with, I think in our day-to-day lives, especially as consumers of news, especially during the time of the pandemic, I think a lot of people have gotten very familiar with thematic mapping. So thematic mapping is where it's usually a map created for a very specific purpose. So I'm sure everyone has seen maps of the pandemic, like where are the most cases in the United States or in the world or whatever. That is a thematic map because it's showing just one thing. It's showing the occurrence of the virus and where it's spreading. And of course, the data set itself might be different. It could be total deaths, it could be total cases, it could be total recovered, but each one of those is a specific thematic map. And so all of those kinds of maps, whether it's a general purpose or whether it's thematic, we use GIS to create those maps today. So that has basically replaced what used to be Mylar and ink and rulers and drafting tables and all that stuff.
So you'd mentioned these different types of maps, and myself being a practitioner of maps. I taught land navigation for a long time. I don't even own a GPS aside the one they stuck in my phone. Point being is we use maps more than we've ever used them before. And I've noticed most people have no idea how to read or use a map. What do you think is happening here with this loss of this map information or map knowledge?
Yeah, well, I think, even in the days when I was younger, with pre-cell phones, no smartphones, no nothing, the idea of using the sun for navigation was something that we did as kids. And so we could say, well, the sun, it looks like the sun is setting. Well, that's kind of the west over there. And I think that's where we came from, or I think I live over in that area. So we would kind of use it to kind of get back that way. So there was sort of this spatial awareness that humans do have. And we've seen this throughout human history, that we have an incredible sense of spatial reckoning. Look at what the Polynesians were able to achieve in island hopping in the Pacific with no tools whatsoever, other than like the rudimentary maps they made with like bamboo, and they had like shell maps where they kind of marked the islands. But a lot of it was just years and years and generational experience with the wind patterns, the current patterns, and they passed that knowledge down from one generation to another. And that's how they were able to achieve pretty remarkable dead reckoning.
To ask you a very direct question about that loss of knowledge that you're talking about, I feel, and I'm asking you, is there a loss of knowledge? It seems like there is. And my problem with that goes back to geopolitical issues. Because when you have people who don't understand maps and don't understand what they're looking at, now you've got people going, oh yeah, flat earth, that's a thing, And so Is this geopolitically a situation, or am I just overreacting?
No, I think it is. I mean, because ultimately what we're talking about is that policy, whether it's public policy or whether it's public desire or demand that is escalated to a government level where policy is set, if the public is demanding a certain kind of action on behalf of the government to represent their interests, and if the public doesn't know what they're talking about because they don't understand spatial relationships on the earth, they don't understand scale, whatever it might be, then basically it is a very serious concern, because basically your assumptions about what should be done from a policy perspective is being based on a woefully inadequate foundation of knowledge about the way things really are, about the distance of things, or the, what's really going on. And this touches upon a much, much bigger topic about geographic illiteracy that we may need to talk about in the future. But that issue is very real in today's society. I love the fact that maps are being used so much now, but at the same time, exactly like you said, I'm seeing a lot of people who just see it as this basic tool on their phone, and they don't really understand what's going on. They're just going where the arrow tells them to go. And that's why we've seen countless cases of cars driving off cliffs, cars driving into rivers or lakes or elsewhere, because the people are just following whatever it tells them to do, and they don't realize that spatial data can be faulty.
Cut to the clip from The Office where I think Michael Scott does exactly that.
Yeah.
Make a right
Maybe it's
turn.
a shortcut, Dwight. It said go to the right.
It can't mean that. There's a lake there.
I think it knows where it is going.
This is
the
lake.
machine
This
knows.
is the lake.
Stop yelling at me.
No, it's
Stop
up there.
yelling.
There's no road here.